Good evening. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and welcome to Vampire Reviews, where we make points about vampires. Whether those points are in charisma or strength is often up for a debate. Tonight, we discuss this. It's a book. I love books. It even has pictures. Strahd, the Memoirs of a Vampire by P.N. Elrod. Before we get into it, there are a few things you should know. Vampire things. This is part of the Ravenloft novelization series. It's actually the 7th book in the series, but they're all standalone novels for the most part, written by different authors about different characters set in this world. And this world is based in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting, where this character, Strahd, is the central original antagonist. Now, you know D&D is huge, and Strahd is huge. He's still the featured villain in editions as recent as 2 years ago. There is so much to get into about him as a vampire character, much less his whole universe. But tonight, we are going back to the very beginning. It all started with the advanced D&D module Ravenloft in 1983. Yeah, 35 years ago. Hey, Ravenloft, did you know that by the time you're 35, you should have inspired 24 spin-off novels, 3 video games, and reinterpretations and expansions for 5 D&D editions? Oh, you've done all that? Well, you're ahead of the rest of us millennials. I'm still working on trading avocados for my mortgage. Crips aren't cheap. But even though this novel came out 10 years after Strahd's first introduction in the game, it takes us back even further. 500 years into Strahd's past to tell the tale of how and why he became a vampire in the first place. Because when you have such a popular, beloved villain, of course everyone wants to learn his tragic backstory. Nobody is born evil, after all. How did Strahd fall into darkness? Vampires already existed in Dungeons & Dragons, of course, but the original Ravenloft module came about because players wanted to fight Dracula, specifically. I mean, who wouldn't? You take something you love, you add Dracula to it, instant improvement. Because unlike the high fantasy style vampires the game had before, Dracula comes with a certain aesthetic. A dark, spooky, gothic aesthetic. A creepy, haunted castle atop a cliff over a terrifying, wolf-ridden forest, full of traps and nightmare creatures under the cover of a constant torrential thunderstorm. Cobwebs everywhere, creaking floors, echoing disembodied footfalls, eerie music from nowhere, flickering apparitions in the corner of your eye, mournful moaning down long, dark, drafty corridors. And of course, thousands and thousands of bats. So many bats! Life goals. This fabulously gothic setting is a little bubble world that's trapped in an alternate plane of D&D existence called the demi-plane of dread, where mysterious dark powers banish dark lords to live out their cursed existences in their little kingdoms, surrounded by choking mists, cut off from the real world. This Dracula vampire was the first Dark Lord, but over the years the setting expanded to many others. Remember how when we talked about World of Darkness and Vampire the Masquerade, I mentioned that the game made a concerted effort to avoid all Dracula stereotypes with any of its vampires? It did such a good job with that no one can even agree which clan Dracula should rightfully belong to. Well, Ravenloft does the exact opposite. It's as gothic and stereotypically vampire-y as you can get. Pure indulgence. Right down to the vampire's Victorian wardrobe, which is ridiculously anachronistic in the medieval-style D&D setting. But who cares? Give the people what they want. Of course, the vampire is not actually Dracula. Strahd von Zarovich is an original character and his own person with his own life and backstory despite the aesthetic similarities. And when our world was first blessed with his existence, he was considered the first truly well-developed villain to appear in the AD&D game system. Aside from just his generally beloved vampire awesomeness, he was also fully capable of changing the course of the game's events to pursue his goals. And does he have goals? The module stresses that the DM plays Strahd as carefully and craftily as any of the PCs to study him deeply and truly do his villainous genius justice. It really wants you to get just how much of a genius he is. Yeah. I can't help thinking of this when I read it.
Wile E. Coyote, super genius.
And now I'm imagining Strahd's castle full of Acme crates of rocket packs and jet-powered roller skates, but Gothic ones, of course, with little bat wings on the heels. You draw cards at the start of playing to determine what Strahd's goal is for the game. It can be one of four. The first is an effort to escape his bubble world. The second is to create a sphere of perpetual darkness that will make his vampire life more awesome. Another is to destroy the only weapon that can kill him. And the last is to trick the players into attacking the maiden he loves so he can rescue her and make her fall for him. And that's where things get interesting. Aside from just the fun of exploring the spooky castle, most of the game is fighting monsters, figuring out traps and puzzles like D&D modules that came before until the PCs finally destroy the big boss at the end and rescue the village from the vampire's reign of devilish, unholy terror. Your basic D&D hijinks with a Halloween flavor. And sure, all that's fun to play, but we are here to discuss the deeper parts of the vampire. And this maiden character is where that happens. We learn she's the reincarnation of Strahd's long-lost love, Tatiana. And Tatiana is the reason he became a vampire in the first place. The reason his character transformed from a generally good and fair human warlord 500 years ago to the cruel, devilish, chaotic, evil monster of terror he is now. The module gives us the basics of Strahd's tragic, twisted origins, but this is the book that tells the whole entire tale in his own words. P.N. Elrod is the author TSR hired to write the book. She was already famous for her Vampire Files series, and her Red Death came out that same year. I actually have not read these yet, so I came to Strahd with no biases or expectations. She has Strahd start his memoir by saying he's clearing up some of the lies told about him in the 10 years between his creation and this novel. Ravenloft did quite well for D&D and grew in all kinds of ways with the introductions of the other Dark Lords. Some of the modules and novels before this one use Strahd and add to his backstory and character, and there are some contradictions. But here, Strahd tells us that those character changes and inconsistencies were lies told by, jealous haters, and he's here now to clear it all up, so we finally get to know the true, deep soul of Strahd. You could argue, hey, he's an evil vampire. He could be an unreliable narrator and lying about all this too. His opinion of himself is certainly biased. But considering how the book is presented, I'm taking it as TSR's efforts to actually set the record straight, establish a consensus of Strahd's character and backstory, and fix the prior mistakes and contradictions and sloppy storytelling in previous renditions. So tonight, we'll take this book at its word. From the original Ravenloft module, what we already know is 500 years ago, Strahd was a decent guy as far as conquering warlords go, but he lamented losing his youth fighting wars. After he settled down to rule his countdom, he fell in love with a village girl, Tatiana, who was just so perfectly beautiful. But she was like, ew, you're old, you're practically dead. And she fell in love with Strahd's hot younger brother, Sergei, instead. Sergei? Even though there's a lot of oddly Russian names in this thing, I'm gonna go with Sergi because I had a friend named that in school, and it will piss off the pedants. Strahd already hated Sergi for being so young and hot, so he was like, dead am I? I'll show you dead. And he turned to dark magic and made a bargain with death to stop aging and killed his brother on his wedding day, which turned Strahd into a vampire so he could have Tatiana for himself. But then she was like, ew, you're evil now. So she threw herself off a cliff and Strahd's castle and lands were transported to the bubble world. Tatiana keeps getting reincarnated and Strahd keeps trying to win her love, but she dies every time, doomed to repeat his curse for eternity. The module tells us that if you encounter Strahd in his brother's tomb, he will be sprawled across Sergi's coffin, weeping tragically. So we can gather that even 500 years later, Strahd feels deep remorse for murdering his brother and his dark choices. While we're looking at the module, it also tells us that in Strahd's bedchamber closet are hanging 28 capes. Not 1, not 12, not 20, but 28. Counting the one he's obviously wearing during the whole adventure, we presume Strahd owns 29. Not 30, that would be too much. 29 is just right. And as we are constantly reminded, Strahd only ever wears 3 colors, black, white, and red, so it's not even like the capes are going to be different. But the module felt it important to include this detail just to remind us how extra this guy is. Give the people what they want! By the time you're 35, you should own at least 1 cape for every night of the moon cycle. Well, get on it. This book does briefly mention his fashion sensibilities, and it does a pretty good job of transitioning the anachronistic Victorian vibe to a medieval fantasy equivalent. Sadly, however, it completely cuts out the fact that Strahd plays the pipe organ like a Haunted House Phantom of the Opera wannabe. Missed opportunity, book! It actually does a lot of toning down. After all, this was 10 years later, 1993. You can't be cool and badass if you're too extra anymore. Heaven forbid Strahd look like some kind of dweeb. It's already hard enough to keep a gritty warlord formidable when the whole point of the book is to expand on his feelings anyway, right? What it chooses to deepen about his character compared to what it leaves shallow gets rather frustrating in that regard. The game only gave us a brief sketch of a deliberately cliché character archetype's backstory. The entire purpose of this book is to expand on that, to make Strahd sympathetic and well-rounded, so you'd think we're gonna get real deep into his feelings and motivations, right? And especially find out what was so special and interesting about Tatiana. What was it about her that spoke to Strahd's heart, connected to his internal issues and emotional damage, how their very souls touched for her, of all people, to make such a huge impact on Strahd, of all people, and set in motion the entire course of events that not only cursed him, but all the poor hapless people of his lands as well. Right? Nope. This book has a lot of fun stuff in it. Battles, atmosphere, betrayal, intrigue, revenge, costumes, architecture, complex relationships with other characters, and more vampire tropes than you can shake a steak at. But it completely drops the ball on that one crucial bit, the whole point of the book in the first place. And look, okay, I know people love this book and Strahd himself, but it's been decades. We can take off the blood-colored glasses and get a little bit critical, because I have some criticisms. Well, really just one big one. So in the book, Strahd's hot kid brother is actually training to be a priest. Not like a Catholic priest, one of those magical sorcerer D&D priests. Strahd's never actually met him because he's been off warlording since before Sergi was born, but after he settles down, Sergi comes to live at the castle. And this time, Strahd doesn't hate him on first sight. He's jealous of Sergi's youth and hotness, but he handles it well and works to incorporate his brother into his life. Strahd's actually not a bad guy. It kind of feels like the book decided it didn't like this whole youth-obsessed aspect of Strahd's character, so it was just like, not gonna make it matter. Maybe that was a good call. He's only 42. That's not that old. Even though Strahd laments his lost youth a couple times in a way that would make him seem unusually vain for a hardened soldier, he also thinks he looks pretty good for his age. And either way, the moments are random and then forgotten. All the rest of the time he's being his badass self who's too macho to care about frivolous stuff like that. Anytime someone talks about their wife or kids or family, Strahd's just like, ugh, mushy stuff, do not care. He's actually much more annoyed by Sergi's goody-goody priestliness than his youth. Strahd is a good ruler, but he knows that being too kind will make the peasants take advantage, and he's worried Sergi's generosity will make Strahd look vulnerable. But Sergi is just so into being a priest that he can't help it. He's just that devoted to his religion. Until he's suddenly not. One day, Sergi meets a girl, Tatiana, and wants to give up his entire life's devotion to be with her. His entire life's devotion. Okay. Guess it didn't mean that much to him, after all. Understandably, Strahd thinks Sergi's completely lost it, because it's so random and sudden and so against Sergi's character that, yeah, it kind of seems hard to believe. That is, until Strahd sees the girl. Then all of a sudden, the same exact thing happens to him. Poof! You're in love now. Even though we've seen Strahd actively repulsed by romance and domesticity multiple times, one look at this girl and all of a sudden he is head over heels, hearts and flowers, gaga, obsessed with her enough to completely give up and destroy his entire world and everyone else he's ever cared about. Now, Strahd makes sure to tell us 2 or 3 times that he's had a good history with the ladies, just in case you would get the idea from all his repulsion of romance that he was some kind of incel. Nope, no way. He is definitely bedded his share of maidens. Of course, the book never shows us any of this on the page, and he even rolls his eyes at other men who are frolicking with the castle girls. Before he meets Titania, on the page, he has no time for or interest in women. And he definitely doesn't want to start a family as a way to deal with his issues of lost youth and desire for legacy. Yuck. No, despite his claims of being quite the ladies' man, all we actually see him care about are war and magic books and ruling. But one look at this girl and he's a whole new person. It's like that baby imprinting scene in Twilight. And why? Well, she's beautiful. No, that's all. What, were you expecting more? She's just so beautiful. He describes her as beautiful enough to make all other women in the world ugly by comparison. All of them. Her smile is like the sun shining on him for the first time in a life full of cloudy skies. But that's it. That's literally it. The whole reason he murders his brother and best friend and destroys his world and dooms all his people is because she's beautiful. Strahd tells us that they spend all this time together, but the reader never gets to see any of it. Their entire relationship is skipped over, like the book thinks readers won't care and just want to get back to the battle scenes. Meanwhile, it's spent plenty of time earlier building up Strahd's relationships with his fighting comrades. As a character, Tatiana's hardly even a real person. She was an orphan, raised by nuns, completely sheltered from the outside world. She says it feels like she didn't even begin living until Sergi brought her to the castle. Life begins at man. And what little we do get to learn of her personality, Strahd doesn't even like. Like Sergi, she's just so good and pure and innocent that she gives away her jewels to the poor. And this pisses Strahd off. He can't stand that she does this, and he wants to correct her behavior. He has absolutely no respect for her whatsoever. And we're supposed to believe that this is his great love? This book was the chance for the franchise to give us the deep, twisted whys, to show us how this girl was special and interesting enough for even the almighty Strahd's heart to break over her. Like, maybe she connects with Strahd on some deep emotional level, makes him realize something about himself, helps him see the world in a new way through her mind or personality, morals, perspectives. But nope, all we get is she's beautiful. And her beauty is enough to make him obsessed in spite of disliking her personality. Would it have been so hard to write her as complex as any of the other characters in the book and have their relationship actually be one of connection even though she rejects him? I don't even know who to blame for this. Was it the author's dropped opportunity, or did she write it deeper but was instructed to change it by TSR? Also, instead of killing herself because Strahd is so evil and scary, Tatiana actually is pretty okay with his new vampire vibe in the moment, and she never even finds out what he did. Nope. She just throws herself off the cliff because her life is just over without Sergi. Please tell me P.N. Elrod writes female characters better in these other books. Strahd's relationship with Tatiana is so shallow and meaningless that I kept waiting for the book to explain that he was under some kind of spell. But that never happened. We're supposed to believe that this is real and strong enough love or obsession or whatever to last for centuries. A spell would have made it make sense at least, or maybe like she's some kind of fake person sent by the dark powers, seemingly pure and innocent and childlike, but actually a corrupting force to lure Sergi away from his religion and entrap Strahd into his path to becoming a vampire and getting his realm cursed into the demiplane of dread. But that wouldn't really work in the sense that the dark powers are supposedly punishing Dark Lords for evils they've done. And if the powers set up Strahd to fall into it in the first place, then that takes the responsibility off of him and kind of negates the whole punishment aspect and makes it meaningless. Ugh! The first time we see Tatiana reincarnated 50 years later, she's now Marina. And Marina was born sexy yesterday. She's a fully grown amnesiac who appears out of nowhere. A creepy rich guy takes her in as a daughter, but really, he wants to marry her, the creep. Strahd tells her that he's her true love and will rescue her from the guy. But before he can finish turning her into a vampire, the guy kills her. This poor woman exists only to suffer and die for Strahd's curse. She has no life of her own, no families, no hobbies, no interests, no personality. Even in the original module, the new reincarnation Arena is interesting. Look at the way they draw her. And the game makes a point of telling us that she's useful on the adventure and a good fighter. She's clearly had a life of interesting experiences that turned her into a fully formed person. Not that a woman needs to swing a sword to be interesting, of course, but the book could have given these girls something other than being love objects. Anything. Okay, so a year after Tatiana dies and Strahd finally is starting to get over his grief a little bit, he meets a woman who's been robbed. She's burgermeister of one of his villages, and he gets bloody, gory, awesome revenge on the thieves, and then this woman takes him to bed. In the one night Strahd spends with this woman, he grows to admire her bravery and strength, and respect her for her loyalty and honesty and fortitude. He keeps thinking about how he wants to drink her blood, but as a gentleman, he refrains. It even matters to him to make sure she's not married or feeling too much grief over her dead husband before he sleeps with her. To him, as a chaotic evil vampire, this matters. This completely random one-shot character gets treated as 20 times more of a person than Tatiana or Marina, and Strahd's totally okay with forgetting about his real, horrible, tragic OTP to shack up with this burgermeister lady for the night, as if Tatiana means nothing at all. Maybe that's supposed to be the ultimate tragedy here? That Tatiana literally means nothing to him and he destroyed everything for nothing? Why else would the book include this other random woman he never sees again and make such a point of showing how much more Strahd actually likes and respects who she is as a person compared to Tatiana? Of course, he never even thinks about it that way. He's supposed to be this super genius, but he completely lacks any personal insight to see his own contradictions and hypocrisy. Oh, the irony of the vampire. When he's rescuing Marina from the guy who wants to marry her, Strahd is filled with disgust that the guy took Marina into his home as a guardian and now wants to violate her trust and feelings by making her marry him when she's obviously not into it. Strahd complains that the guy didn't ask her opinion about the marriage. Yeah, well, neither did you. Dude! This is the exact same thing you did to Tatiana when you tried to steal her away from your brother and you're trying to come off as some moral high horse. You are exactly the same as this guy. He's even the same age as you were, so stop talking about how old and fatherly and creepy he is and how gross that is. He is you. Strahd gains absolutely no insight or understanding from this experience, even after Marina's tragic demise. He just hopes he'll have better luck next time she's reincarnated. The dark powers make a point of keeping him always hoping so the curse never ends, but did becoming a vampire make Strahd lose the part of his brain tied to emotional growth? I mean, that's not unheard of in vampire conversion, to be trapped in a cycle of your own unchanging mind. And he talks about losing his soul a few times. However, the book then has him be so clear-headed and analytical and insightful and decent and honorable about so many other things, even after becoming a vampire, that his sheer oblivious stupidity in this regard ends up being much more frustrating and feeling like bad, inconsistent writing than any kind of deep, tragic, meaningful message. Also, remember how in the game Strahd is sobbing over his brother's crypt, presumably filled with remorse and fraternal love? One of the most interesting character bits it gives us. We never get any of that in the book. Nope. Strahd never thinks of his brother again. I guess the vampire's chaotic evil that takes over his brain makes him immune to such griefs and regrets. But for him to get off the hook for that aspect of suffering is another ball dropped in the whole tragic curse department. The book spends so much time on fight scenes and scenery. You'd think it could spare some time for these character details, but it skips over all of them like they're the boring part. It left me wanting so much more. Good thing there is more. 25 years worth of more. The book ends with Strahd sitting down to continue writing his memoir, and P.N. Elrod wrote a direct sequel a few years later to continue the story. Meanwhile, the games took Strahd's world in all kinds of directions. But those developments are discussions for another night. You may put your blood-colored glasses back on now. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and it's true. My bedchamber closet is seriously lacking. I need to catch up. It's time to go cape shopping. 28 capes. This is actually more of a capelet than an actual cape, but it counts. Thank you so much for watching my video, and thank you so much to my Patreon patrons for all of your support. If you're not already my patron, consider joining to help me make more of these videos. Otherwise, please just like, subscribe to my channel, leave me comments. How many capes do you have in your bedchamber closet?